Juliet and Steve's love story began like a fairy tale. They met at a friend's wedding in Lagos, and their connection was instant. Steve, a tall, ambitious man with dreams bigger than the city itself, found himself captivated by Juliet's beauty and her calm, nurturing nature. She was the kind of woman who made everyone around her feel at ease, and it wasn't long before Steve realized she was the one. After a whirlwind romance, they got married, full of dreams for the future. Steve worked tirelessly, often staying up late at night to build a life that would offer security and comfort for their growing family. When the opportunity came for him to work abroad, it wasn't an easy decision. But the promise of financial stability was too great to pass up. Steve knew that by working abroad, he could provide a better life for Juliet and their 2 young children. With a heavy heart, he left Nigeria, promising to send money regularly to ensure they were well taken care of in his absence. Juliet missed Steve terribly, but she never allowed her loneliness to consume her. She was determined to be the best mother and wife she could be. Every morning, she woke up early to prepare breakfast for the kids before sending them off to school. Her afternoons were spent attending to household chores, ensuring their home was spotless and inviting for when Steve returned. However, it wasn't just her role as a mother and wife that kept Juliet busy. She was deeply involved in her church, where her faith flourished. Pastor Emmanuel was a charismatic leader who commanded the respect and admiration of his congregation. He often preached about the importance of faith, obedience, and divine revelations, and Juliet found herself drawn to his sermons. She attended every church service without fail, even on weekdays. For Juliet, the church was a refuge, a place where she felt connected to God and found peace in her husband's absence. Pastor Emmanuel became a guiding figure in her life, someone she turned to for spiritual advice. One Sunday afternoon, after an intense church service filled with fervent prayers and powerful worship, Pastor Emmanuel approached Juliet with a concerned look. His usually warm and comforting presence felt different today. "Sister Juliet," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I have been praying about your situation, and something is troubling my spirit." Juliet, puzzled by his words, looked at him with curiosity. "Pastor, what do you mean?" "My family is doing well, thanks to God's grace," she responded. Pastor Emmanuel nodded, his eyes narrowing as if searching for the right words. "Yes, you have spoken of your husband working abroad and sending money back home. But I have not felt his presence in your life. Has God revealed anything to you about him?" Juliet, feeling a pang of unease, shook her head. "No, Pastor. Steve is working hard to provide for us. He calls regularly and sends money every month." Pastor Emmanuel remained silent for a moment, his gaze intense. Then he spoke, his words carefully chosen. "Be careful, Sister Juliet. The enemy can be subtle, hiding in plain sight. Sometimes, things are not as they seem." His words echoed in Juliet's mind long after she left the church that day. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had taken root in her heart. Steve had never given her any reason to doubt him. He was always consistent with his calls, never missed a month of sending money, and always spoke of his love for her and the children. Yet, Pastor Emmanuel's warning stayed with her. Juliet tried to dismiss it, telling herself that Steve was a good man who would never betray her. But doubt, once planted, has a way of growing, especially when nurtured by fear. And fear, Juliet realized, had started creeping into her heart. Over the following weeks, Pastor Emmanuel's words continued to linger in Juliet's mind, and the conversations she had with him became more intense. He spoke with more urgency, convincing her that something wasn't right with Steve's situation abroad. "Sister Juliet," he would say, "I keep praying, and God is revealing things to me. There's darkness surrounding your husband's life abroad." Juliet, torn between her love and trust for Steve and her faith in Pastor Emmanuel's divine insights, began to feel confused and anxious. The pastor's words grew stronger with each conversation until one day, he revealed what he claimed was the truth. "Sister Juliet, God has shown me a vision," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. "Your husband, he is living with another woman abroad. He sends you money so you won't suspect, but he has a second family." Juliet's world shattered. She stared at her pastor in disbelief, her mind reeling from the shocking accusation. Juliet's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to process what Pastor Emmanuel had just told her. Could this be true? Could the man she loved, the man who had always been so faithful and devoted, really be living a double life? Juliet felt a wave of nausea wash over her as her thoughts spiraled out of control. "Pastor, are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Steve would never do such a thing." Pastor Emmanuel looked at her with pity in his eyes. "This is not my word, Sister Juliet," he said solemnly. "It is a message from God. I only share with you what he has revealed to me." Juliet's mind was in turmoil. She had always trusted Steve completely, but now she found herself questioning everything. Could Pastor Emmanuel be right? Was Steve deceiving her all along? Without thinking, Juliet picked up her phone and dialed Steve's number. When he answered, she didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Steve," she said, her voice trembling with anger and hurt, "is it true? Do you have another woman over there?" Steve was shocked by Juliet's sudden outburst. "What are you talking about, Juliet?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. "Of course not. I'm working hard, just like I've always done." "Who told you something like that?" Pastor Emmanuel had a revelation from God, Juliet snapped, her anger boiling over. "He said you're living with another woman abroad and sending me money so I won't suspect anything." Steve couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had always been faithful to Juliet, and the thought of her believing such a lie devastated him. "Juliet," he said calmly, trying to diffuse the situation, "you know me. I would never do that. I'm just focused on my work so we can have a better future. Please, don't let this come between us." But Juliet's mind was already made up. Her trust in Pastor Emmanuel's prophetic words outweighed her trust in Steve, and she wasn't about to back down. Over the next few days, Juliet's calls to Steve became more frequent and more demanding. She insisted that he return to Nigeria immediately, threatening to divorce him and take the children if he refused. Steve tried his best to reassure her, to convince her that there was no truth to Pastor Emmanuel's claims, but Juliet wouldn't listen. She was convinced that her pastor's revelation was the truth, and nothing Steve said could change her mind. Left with no other option, Steve reluctantly booked a flight back to Nigeria. When he arrived home, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He had hoped that seeing Juliet in person would help him explain things more clearly, but she remained cold and distant. Every time he tried to talk to her, she would bring up Pastor Emmanuel's vision, accusing him of infidelity and demanding that he prove his loyalty by staying in Nigeria and finding a job there. Steve knew that staying in Nigeria would make it difficult to provide for his family the way he had been while working abroad, but Juliet was adamant. She insisted that he find a job in Nigeria, regardless of the salary. Steve searched tirelessly for a well-paying job, but opportunities were scarce. As the months passed, their financial situation deteriorated rapidly. The comfortable life they once enjoyed became a distant memory as bills piled up and expenses mounted. Juliet, who had always been a housewife, was unprepared for the harsh realities of their new life. She had never had to worry about money before, but now she found herself struggling to make ends meet. The stress of their financial situation only added to the strain on their marriage, and the tension between them grew with each passing day. Steve did his best to keep their family afloat, but the weight of their circumstances was taking its toll on him. As Juliet watched her once strong marriage crumble under the weight of doubt, financial strain, and mistrust, she began to question the choices she had made. Was Pastor Emmanuel's revelation really a divine message from God, or had she allowed herself to be swayed by fear and misplaced faith? She had always prided herself on being a devoted wife and mother, but now she wondered if her devotion had been misguided. Juliet started to realize that her blind trust in Pastor Emmanuel's words had led her to make decisions that were tearing her family apart. The man she had loved and trusted was now distant, not because of any wrongdoing on his part, but because of the doubts she had allowed to take root in her heart. Juliet found herself reflecting on the countless times Steve had called from abroad, always eager to hear about their lives back home, always concerned for their well-being. Could she have been wrong all along? One evening, after a particularly difficult day of trying to make ends meet, Juliet found herself alone in their small living room. The house felt colder than it used to, and not just because of the temperature. The warmth that once filled their home, the love and laughter they had shared, seemed to have vanished. Juliet sat quietly, staring at the framed family photo on the wall. In the picture, they were all smiling, Steve, herself, and their two kids, frozen in a moment of happiness that now seemed so distant. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how much she had allowed fear and uncertainty to change her. Later that night, when Steve returned home from another long day of job hunting, he found Juliet sitting on the couch, deep in thought. He approached her cautiously, unsure of how to navigate the fragile state of their relationship. "Juliet," he said softly, "we need to talk." Juliet looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and sorrow. "Steve, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I've been so blind. I let someone else's words get between us, and I never should have doubted you. I didn't know what to believe." Steve sat beside her, relieved but also cautious. "Juliet, I understand you were scared. But I've never given you a reason to doubt me. I've always been honest with you because I love you. We've been through so much together, and I would never betray that trust." Juliet nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I let Pastor Emmanuel's words cloud my judgment. I trusted him so much that I stopped trusting you. But I see now that I made a mistake. I'm sorry, Steve. I don't want to lose you." Steve gently wiped away her tears and took her hand in his. "We've both made mistakes, Juliet. But we can't let those mistakes destroy what we have. We need to rebuild our trust in each other, not let anyone else come between us." Juliet took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "You're right. We need to focus on us, on our family. I'll talk to Pastor Emmanuel and tell him that I won't be attending the church anymore. I've realized that my faith should be in God, not in any one person." Steve nodded in agreement. "That's a good start, but we also need to work on healing our relationship, Juliet. It's going to take time, but I believe we can get through this." Over the next few weeks, Juliet and Steve made a conscious effort to reconnect. They spent more time together as a family, focusing on rebuilding the trust that had been shaken. Juliet also found herself rediscovering her faith in God, not through the words of Pastor Emmanuel, but through her own prayers and reflections. She realized that her relationship with God was personal, and she didn't need anyone else's validation to feel connected to Him. Eventually, Steve found a job in Nigeria, and while it didn't pay as much as his previous work abroad, they managed to make ends meet. Their financial situation slowly improved, but more importantly, their relationship grew stronger. They learned to communicate openly, to trust each other, and to not let outside influences dictate their lives. As they stood together, hand in hand, watching their children play in the yard, Juliet knew that they had weathered the storm. Their love had been tested, but it had also been strengthened. And for the first time in a long while, Juliet felt at peace, knowing that she had found her way back to the true foundation of her family love, trust, and faith in each other.